the region, including through the new £8.5 million round of the Just Transition Fund for the North East and Moray.
Maggie Chapman.
During Tuesday's ministerial statement on this issue, the Minister didn't mention communities or answer my question about community benefit and community participation in planning. Will he today say how communities can expect to benefit from the collective commons that are our renewables as we harness them for the future, and how communities will genuinely be involved in the planning that must happen with urgency?
Minister.
Well, communities clearly are important, and I attempted to touch on that issue in my statement. But I certainly, on the point that the member is making about community benefit, and I think she may be talking here about onshore developments, the Scottish Government is in touch with the UK Government because the issue of mandating community benefits is reserved to the UK, about the very issue of ensuring that communities are the mandatory recipients of benefits in future.
Question number 6 is not lodged. Question number 7, Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on ScotRail driver recruitment and training programmes in light of previous service reductions attributed to staffing shortages.
Cabinet Secretary Fiona Hislop.
We have worked hard in Scotland to ensure employers are in a position to table and negotiate a fair and affordable settlement on pay, and I'm pleased that ASLA have accepted a multi-year pay offer for trained drivers, an offer which meets inflation and gives drivers and their families security for the next 2 years. ScotRail is taking steps to eradicate its reliance on rest day and overtime working, which is all too common in the rail industry, and with 160 drivers recruited per year, its recruitment is at record levels and higher than any other operator in Britain. Of course, these highly skilled jobs require a carefully delivered training programme before recruited candidates can perform safely in their roles. The number of trainee drivers is limited by ScotRail's ability to safely deliver practical handling experience at any one time without disrupting service provision. With efforts made with the recruitment and training, ScotRail expects to see improvements in reliability from autumn this year.
Rona Mackay.
I thank the Minister for that answer. Last summer, ScotRail removed Bishopbriggs and Lenzie from the Edinburgh service due to driver shortages, a change that significantly impacted commuters in my constituency. Can the Minister confirm whether driver numbers have now recovered sufficiently to prevent a repeat of such timetable reductions, and whether full service retention is planned for these stations?
Cabinet Secretary.
So the previous temporary timetable related to the historical issues of driver availability and was lifted in early October last year. ScotRail is working hard to address this historical issue inherited from the previous private sector franchisees by recruiting the drivers, as I've mentioned, to have full availability on all routes. Remember that last summer, industrial action restricted availability of drivers who chose, as is their right, not to work their rest day, and this also affected timetables. As I said, the process of training the drivers is a complex one, and ScotRail is also dealing with a significant staff attrition as drivers reach their retirement age. So ScotRail has a robust recruitment process in place, which will improve driver availability even further, including for stations in Lenzie and Bishopbriggs, and I recognise the member's interest in our constituency in specifying the routes that she did.
Question number 8, Sarah Boyack.
To ask the Scottish Government what support it is giving to local authorities to enable them to implement their local heat and energy efficiency strategies.
Minister Alistair Allen.
We are committed to supporting local authorities to deliver their LHEs and are continuously seeking their input on the process of doing so. The Scottish Government is providing £2.4 million per annum to local authorities to use their own discretion to support LHEs development and implementation. Zero Waste Scotland is also delivering capacity building to local authorities focused on LE's implementation. We've also committed over £815,000 of grant funding to local authorities through our Heat Network Support Unit to take forward heat network opportunities.
Sarah Boyack.
Given the financial investment required, what additional support and advice financially will the Scottish Government give councils to enable them to develop not-for-profit heat networks, given their huge success in Denmark over decades? And will there be specific financial support for regional networks so that councils can maximise the benefits from heat and renewable generation?
Minister.
Well, as I mentioned, there is ongoing support from the Scottish Government in a number of these areas, but I think it's worth mentioning the commitment that the Scottish Government has to developing heat networks as a key part of the way that we decarbonise our country in future. We've, as I mentioned, funded Zero Waste Scotland to provide capacity building in support of local authorities. And I think it's also probably worth pointing out in Edinburgh, which I know will be of interest to the member, that, for instance, in Edinburgh, the City Council have recently utilised their funding to further refine the zones identified within their LEs and seek legal counsel on the most appropriate delivery model to bring them to market.
Martin Whitfield.
Presiding Officer, and can I thank the Minister for the answers to those questions. One of the challenges with local heat and energy efficiency strategies is that they cross local authority areas. Can the Minister explain what support the Scottish Government is giving to local authorities across borders to work together for these local heat strategies, and how can that be advanced at a quicker pace than perhaps is happening at the moment?
Minister.
Well, the member is right to point to the fact that some of these issues do cross local authority boundaries, and we work with local authorities to ensure that cooperation is there. We do know there is a particular enthusiasm around heat network development, and we do have information on grant funding allocated via the Heat Network Support Unit, which equates to over £815,000 to support the development of these wider, city-wide or town-wide or cross-local authority heat networks. I would very much encourage the member to contact the Scottish Government, indeed, if he requires anything about his local area. But that cooperation is certainly being promoted by the Scottish Government.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. There will now be a suspension until 12 noon. Thank you, colleagues. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1 I call Russell Finlay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In recent weeks, we've witnessed a sickening outbreak of gangland violence across the country. 2 Scottish drug dealers have now been shot dead in Spain. Their gang has waged a turf war on Scotland's streets since the dawn of devolution, and this has mutated to include proxy groups, including the US-sanctioned Kinahan cartel. These parasites grow rich by preying on society's most vulnerable. These cowards cause terror and death with guns, knives and firebombs. These thugs go after journalists, politicians, businessmen, police and prison officers. Organised crime is out of control and communities are living in fear. Does John Swinney accept that the Scottish Parliament has failed to tackle organised crime in Scotland?
First Minister.
There was an awful lot in what Mr Finlay said originally, with which I agreed, because organised crime is intolerable, it is unacceptable, it requires the forensic attention of our police and criminal justice authorities to tackle it, and that is being undertaken within Scotland on a relentless basis by Police Scotland and by the criminal justice authorities. I would expect the authorities to pursue that level of scrutiny and activity, and that is what is happening. So I don't agree with Mr Finlay's conclusion that he ended his question upon.
Russell Finlay.
Well, John Swinney says he agrees about the seriousness of organised crime. Under successive SNP and Labour governments, organised crime is rarely on the agenda. It wasn't even mentioned in this government's flagship 5-year justice strategy, not even once. And I get into politics because I couldn't understand why politicians don't talk about its malevolent reach and devastating harm. Local frontline policing is absolutely critical. And the Scottish Police Federation has said, and I quote, "The bottom line is the intelligence in organised crime groups and terrorism comes from the communities. If you don't have community police officers out there patrolling and picking up on that intelligence, then they are missing out on so much." And under the SNP, however, officer numbers have fallen by nearly 1,000. So does John Swinney accept the view of frontline officers that his government's decision to reduce police numbers inevitably fuels organised crime?
First Minister.
There are quite a number of flaws in the argument that has been put forward by Russell Finlay. The first flaw is that there are a very high number of participants in organised crime activity who are currently incarcerated for a very long time in the jails of Scotland, contributing to the significant congestion that is in our prison system just now. And one of the operational challenges for the Scottish Prison Service, which is why I admire their work so strongly, is that they are having to ensure that our prisons remain safe internally because of the number of members of organised crime groups who are housed in our prisons, because they cannot be housed together for the danger of internal stability to our prisons. And that's the type of focused work that the Scottish Prison Service is taking forward. The second flaw in Mr Finlay's argument is that this government established the Scottish Crime Campus, which is viewed across the world as one of the most innovative and successful measures of bringing together all of the intelligence gathering, whether it's Police Scotland or the National Crime Agency or the enforcement authorities of the United Kingdom in one place. Indeed, it is visited by people around the world because of its leading nature. And the third thing, Mr Finlay said we never talk about these things. Well, 3 times a year, the Serious Organised Crime Task Force is brought together within the government, involving local authorities, the NHS, Police Scotland, the National Crime Agency, His Majesty's Revenue and Customs and various other organisations to make sure that we tackle this issue. And indeed, the Serious Organised Crime Strategy was published in February 2022, updating the actions that we are taking as a government.
Russell Finlay.
The First Minister talks about the prisons being safe. Well, tell that to the 10 prison officers whose cars have been firebombed outside Scotland's prisons by organised crime gangs fighting for control of the drugs trade inside Scotland's prisons. There's a dangerous complacency to this government's approach. And we also need to stop the crime bosses from exploiting vulnerable young people. The 2 men shot dead in Spain were groomed for a life of crime. Most of their gang associates are dead or in prison. And now there's an official policy in place that makes young people even more vulnerable to exploitation. Senior Police Scotland officers say that under-25 sentencing guidelines are part of the problem. Detective Superintendent Andy Patrick said, quoting, "Organised crime groups are exploiting this policy. They are coercing young and vulnerable people to carry out some of these crimes because they are under reduced risk of imprisonment." Will John Swinney rethink his government's support of these damaging guidelines?
First Minister.
Not for the first time, Presiding Officer, I cannot allow Mr Finlay's remarks to stand about the under-25 sentencing guidelines. It is misleading to say to members of the public that there are no consequences for criminal activity under the age of 25, because there are. There are very serious consequences which involve imprisonment. So we cannot have messages being issued from this Parliament which indicate that there are no consequences for serious criminal activity, because there are, no matter the age of the individual involved. So we just cannot have this as a Parliament where we do not properly represent what the law and the sentencing guidelines state, because people could take the wrong conclusions from that. Now, Mr Finlay's made a number of remarks about the shootings that took place in Spain in recent days. These are live police investigations, so I'm not able to comment on these particular issues. They have been pursued by the Spanish authorities. But what I do say to Parliament is that any individual involved in criminal activity, no matter their age, must be aware of the severity of the punishments that exist, and that's the right position for people to hear from this Parliament.
Russell Finlay.
Presiding Officer, John Swinney appears to be hearing things. I said no such thing. We've got top-level crime bosses making millions of pounds from killing vulnerable Scots with their drugs. We were told that the Mr Biggs would be bankrupted by a proceeds of crime law that was passed at the start of devolution. But the law has failed. Criminals and their white-collar enablers no longer fear proceeds of crime. And 18 months ago, the SNP rejected my call to review why it's not working. According to the Crown Office, one drug dealer made more than £126 million, but they can only find £118,000 worth of his assets. Proceeds of crime needs an urgent and radical overhaul. We must turn the tables on the drugs gangs so that they live in fear. So will John Swinney toughen this legislation to make it fit to tackle organised crime in 2025 and beyond?
First Minister.
Well, I'm open to making sure we've got the correct legislative framework in place to deal with criminality in our country. That's why the government brings forward legislation. So Mr Finlay is making suggestions about an area of policy that could be considered for strengthening. I am perfectly willing to consider that, because I don't want anybody to benefit from criminal activity in our society, and I want people to be punished accordingly. So the government will always keep legislation under review, but it has to be acknowledged that we have, and our criminal justice authorities, the police and the Crown, have been successful in apprehending, imprisoning, interrupting, disrupting organised crime in this country, and I give the public the assurance that under my government's leadership that will be sustained in the years to come.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, having your baby in neonatal intensive care is a terrifying experience for any parent. But families whose babies are being cared for by the doctors and nurses at Wishaw Neonatal know that their child is being treated close to home in one of the best neonatal departments in the country. This unit treats many of the sickest babies every year. It's allowed new parents in Lanarkshire to stay close to their families and support network during some of the most difficult and emotional times of their lives. Wishaw Neonatal has won awards for the standard of care it delivers, and even people in this chamber have relied on the unit in their time of need. So why does the SNP want to downgrade this life-saving unit?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the recommendations that the Government has considered in relation to the neonatal unit at Wishaw General Hospital were the product of advice from an expert group that included the Medical Director of NHS Forth Valley, Scottish Neonatal Nurses Group, Bliss, the UK's leading charity for babies born premature or sick, and the Scottish Perinatal Network. Now, this group recommended that we should take forward a model which was tested in a number of different sites around the country, the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, Cross House, Edinburgh Royal Infirmary and Victoria Hospital, which proposed that there should be units located at the Royal Hospital for Children, Glasgow, Aberdeen Maternity Hospital and Edinburgh Royal Infirmity's Simon Centre for Reproductive Health. Now, those recommendations were made to affect the babies that are at the most serious, who have the most serious and complex conditions or are at the extremes of prematurity, who need the most specialist level of care to have the best chance of survival. Now, that is professional advice, expert clinical advice that the Government has received, and I think the Government is correct to follow the clinical advice that we have received. I would indicate that the vast majority of babies will still be cared for in their local neonatal unit, and these units, including Wishaw, will continue to deliver a range of care, including some intensive care.
Anna Sarwar.
My understanding is that experts actually suggested a range, and the Government is choosing the lower level of that range rather than other options, because the reality is that we know that downgrading Wishaw neonatal will force families to travel long journeys for care. Take the example of Tammy Johnson. Her son Kai was so sick when he was born that she wasn't allowed to touch him for 72 hours. She gave birth to him locally in Wishaw. But under the SNP's plans, she would be forced to travel perhaps to Aberdeen or even further afield. She told me Kai was so ill that he was 4 weeks old before I was allowed to pick him up. How would he have been put in an ambulance anywhere, let alone to Aberdeen? Doing things like that can cause everlasting damage. The SNP's plans to downgrade the Wishaw neonatal unit are opposed by clinicians, experts and parents like Tammy. So why does John Swinney think that he is right, but the experts, the clinicians, the nurses and the parents are wrong?
First Minister.
There are 2 points that I will take issue with Mr Sarwar about in his description of what he's put to Parliament today. The first is that this is somehow my personal individual view. This has been a view where the Government has sought expert clinical opinion. This has not been conjured up by the Government considering an issue on its own behalf. We have sought expert clinical opinion, which I've put on the record as to where that's come from. And there will be other occasions in Parliament where members of Parliament will take the Government to task for not following expert opinion, and here Mr Sarwar wants me to ignore expert clinical opinion, which has led us to the conclusions that we have led to. And the second point that I would make is in relation to the future of the Wishaw unit. The unit at Wishaw will still continue, but for a very small number of babies where there is a need for expert specialist care to maximise their chances of survival, will have recommended to be treated in a different way. And that's the expert advice that the Government has received.
Anna Sarwar.
I think John Swinney is choosing to listen to certain experts and ignore other experts in the process and hide behind experts when it comes to this Government's decision. The reality is that this is an award-winning unit that is giving life-saving care, and the expertise exists there, but would not if this unit was downgraded. And the SNP's failure to support neonatal and NHS services has a human cost. I'll give him another case, the case of Amanda Todd, a mum who faced the prospect of travelling from Scotland to Dublin to give birth. Why? Because the SNP has already overseen a shortage of beds here. Amanda only found out that there would be space in Scotland for her and her baby the day before her operation. She had to be told to plan to go to Dublin. Amanda told me it seems that the SNP government cares more about saving money than saving babies' lives. But Amanda's story is just one example of how the SNP has broken our NHS. Just this week we learnt CAM's waiting list growing, Scotland's NHS facing a cancer specialist crisis, and more Scots than ever before being forced to go private. So isn't it the case that the NHS simply isn't safe in John Swinney's hands?
Yep. Yeah. First Minister.
The first thing I want to say is that there is nothing in the proposal about Wishaw General Hospital that is about saving money. It's about maximising the chances of saving babies' lives. Yeah. That's what the proposal is about, informed by expert opinion. Now, on the question of cancer care that Mr Sarwar raised, What I would indicate to him is that in relation to the 31-day standard, the performance at the last stage of reporting was 94.7% of patients were treated within 31 days of a decision to treat. And the median wait for treatment was 4 days. 4 days. So at least half of patients are being given treatment within 4 days of being referred for the 31-day standard. Now, I appreciate there are pressures on cancer services and on healthcare services across the country. That's why the Government has brought forward measures which are strengthening the National Health Service, which are, for example, we committed to an additional 64,000 appointments and procedures by March of this year, and we didn't deliver 64,000, we delivered 105,500. Now, that is the Scottish Government putting in the investment to strengthen delivery so that we reduce waiting times and improve access to the National Health Service, and that will dominate the Government's approach to the National Health Service in the period to come.
Question number 3, Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, sanitary towels and wet wipes on the beach at North Berwick, raw sewage in Gala, a beach covered in thick brown discharge in Dumfries and Galloway, the River Almond making swimmers sick, and paddleboarders covered in sewage in the River Tay. Today, on World Environment Day, the Scottish Liberal Democrats are publishing new research showing thousands of complaints from members of the public about sewage. Sewage that is, I quote, absolutely honking in Dingwall. Presiding Officer, songs were written about Scotland being the land of the shining river. Does the First Minister mind that his government's own water company is dumping so much sewage into them?
First Minister.
So in relation to the question of water quality, 87% of Scotland's entire water environment is assessed by SEPA as having a high or good classification for water quality. That has increased from 82% in 2014. So what I would obviously I want to make sure that we've got the highest quality natural environment, that we have water systems that are of the highest quality, and that indicates that the Government is making progress on the steps that were taken to ensure that that is the case.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Well, the complacency in the First Minister's answer suggests that he is content with the situation as it is. But the European Court of Justice has ruled sewage dumping should only happen in exceptional circumstances. But it's happening all the time, almost everywhere, even on dry days. And last year, Scottish Water dumped sewage at least 24,500 times. But the lack of monitoring means that's only a fraction of what's really going on. Scottish Liberal Democrats are calling for a new Act of Parliament, a Clean Water Act, to tackle this, because under the SNP, communities are just expected to put up with it. Presiding Officer, last week, Thames Water got fined £100 million for sewage dumping, but there are never any consequences here in Scotland. Is that because the First Minister knows it's actually his government that's at fault for this absolutely honking problem?
First Minister.
Well, I have to say what's absolutely honking is Mr Cole-Hamilton's attempt to conflate the situation in Scotland and the operation of one of the strongest assets in our country, of a publicly owned water network with Thames Water. The privatisation of water in England has been an unmitigated disaster for the people of England and Wales, and I thank our predecessors for not taking such a foolish decision in the first place. And we operate in a situation which is not perfect, but where we have a very high quality level of performance in the quality of our natural environment. And I don't think it's a good advert for Mr Cole-Hamilton to undermine the strength of the natural environment of Scotland when we are spending £500 million to improve water quality in Scotland, and then to compare Scotland's water, an asset to our country, to the folly that is privatisation in England and Wales.
Question number 4, Ben Macpherson.
to ask the First Minister how the Scottish Government is supporting film and TV production in Edinburgh and throughout Scotland.
First Minister.
President Officer, we are committed to seizing the significant opportunities to grow our screen sector and have increased the budget for Screen Scotland, our dedicated public agency for screen, by £2 million in the current financial year to £11.25 million. This allows Screen Scotland to continue to nurture locally originated content, develop skills and training opportunities, education for the next generation and increase inward investment. An ever-increasing number of productions are choosing Scotland, such as the latest Netflix drama Department Q, which was supported by Screen Scotland and filmed on-set and in studio in Edinburgh.
Ben Macpherson.
I thank the First Minister for that answer, and as he has said, there have been several successful, notable productions filmed in Scotland in recent years, making a really positive impact creatively and economically. As has been mentioned, last week Netflix's new, gripping, fictitious drama Department Q was released globally, much of which was filmed at First Stage Studios in Leith in my constituency and other locations around Edinburgh and elsewhere in our picturesque nation. Department Q is currently one of the most viewed series on Netflix. At the moment, it is ranked #1 in the UK. It promotes our country in various ways. Even this Parliament gets a mention. And much of the very talented cast and crew are Scots. The producers, Left Bank Pictures, have stated that they had a great experience filming in Scotland, which is really uplifting. Therefore, how can we build on our recent success, continue to grow our screen industry and work together across the public sector to make Scotland an even better and attractive place for more filming commissions, including from the BBC and Channel 4?
First Minister.
Mr Macpherson makes a very strong account of the situation in his constituency, and I welcome very much the investment that's been made around Department Q. I think it's been a tremendous success and will be a great advert and showcase for our country. The Government will support the screen sector as strongly as we can. As I indicated in my earlier answer, we've increased the budget for Screen Scotland, and of course the screen strategy that was published last year outlines an ambitious plan to grow the sector further and to combine international investment with increased support for emerging Scottish producers and local creative origination. So this is a development that is very much welcome, and I'm delighted that Mr Macpherson has highlighted the significance of this opportunity for Scotland.
Sandesh Gulhani.
Thank you. ScotRail is owned by the Scottish Government, yet it has chosen to use an AI voice instead of employ a Scottish voice actor. Is this how the Scottish Government supports actors?
Sorry, Dr Gulhani. I was calling supplementaries to that particular question. Oh, pardon me. You've come round to actors. I've just picked up your last comment. Thank you. Do continue. My apologies.
Well, that was my question. Is this how the Scottish Government supports actors?
First Minister.
Well, ScotRail have taken forward a development. I understand it's caused some controversy. I'm sure ScotRail are engaging constructively with all concerned, and I think sometimes these things need to be, just need careful handling, and I'm sure ScotRail will be doing exactly that. And the Transport Secretary tells me they're fixing it, so they'll be fixing it.
Sarah Boyack.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, it's great to hear about new film production in Scotland, but we also need to see those films in Scotland. And can I inform the First Minister that the Filmhouse, after support, is going to open at the end of this month, but it needs a tiny amount of capital to ensure it to be accessible and to use all the best forms to be able to use those films in the Filmhouse. So will the First Minister commit to have a look at the tiny amount of capital funding that it needs to get that accessibility over the line?
First Minister.
Given that the proposition was put to me in such a constructive fashion, I will heartily agree to that. If Sarah Boyack would like to furnish me, I'm quite sure Mr Robertson will be close to the detail on all of this, but if she would furnish me with the details, I will have a close look at it. The Filmhouse is a magnificent asset in the city of Edinburgh. I can remember in my youth the rite of passage being able to see films in the Filmhouse, so I'm very supportive, but we'll see what the Government can do to help.
Question number 5, Ros McCall.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports that Police Scotland's National Child Abuse Investigation Unit now carries out 700 child sexual abuse investigations a year, representing an increase of 30% since 2015.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, child sexual abuse and exploitation are abhorrent crimes and have a devastating impact on victims and their families. My heart goes out to any child who has experienced abuse. Any reported rise of abuse of this nature is, of course, deeply concerning, and I want to recognise the vital work of Police Scotland's Child Abuse Investigation Unit in identifying and safeguarding children, stopping perpetrators and bringing them to justice. The Scottish Government is working with Police Scotland and other partners to support robust collective action. I would encourage anyone with a concern about a child to contact Police Scotland.
Ros McCall.
Thank you. People based in Scotland are offending against Scottish children. It's a lot closer to home these days. It's on our doorstep. We are actioning between 15 and 20 search warrants on a weekly basis across Scotland. Let's be perfectly blunt about it. The demand is through the roof. Not my words, but the words of the Police Scotland's Deputy Chief Inspector. First Minister, our children are in more danger thanks to the progress of technology now than in previous decades, and paedophiles can now make direct contact with children within 30 seconds, a truly terrifying statistic. And to say this is down to online plans to control is naive in the extreme. And since 2015, police numbers are down by under 750. So my question is simply this: how can Police Scotland keep our children safe with less officers and increasing crime?
First Minister.
There's a number of points I'd make to Ros McCall. The first is that the fact that the Police Scotland National Child Abuse Investigation Unit is carrying out many more investigations illustrates that police resources are being deployed appropriately to tackle issues of serious crime within our society. So that should be the first point of reassurance. The second is that the work that is undertaken in relation to prosecutions, for example, is formidably effective. So the conviction rate for individuals charged with or prosecuted for child abuse in 2022-23 was at 89%. So the evidence gathering by the police and the Crown is formidably strong to be able to get convictions at that level. And that level has been sustained despite the fact that there has been a growth in cases. The third point I would say to Ros McCall is that there is a lot of work undertaken by Scotland, within Scotland, which supports international activity in relation to child sexual abuse. And the Atlanta Declaration, which brings together the world's leading child protection experts to tackle child sexual abuse, has its roots in Scotland. And it's part of the work that we're taking forward to lead the international effort in this respect. And the final point I would make is that Ros McCall said that it was naive to expect online platforms to tackle this issue. I don't think that's naive. I think that's an absolute obligation on online platforms to tackle this issue, because online platforms are currently getting away scot-free, and we engage with the United Kingdom Government to do as much as we can to ensure that online platforms live up to their responsibilities.
Question number 6, Mark Ruskell.
Thank you. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to secure direct ferry routes between Scotland and France.
First Minister.
Officer, the Scottish Government remains wholly convinced that Scotland's future is best served by being a member of the European Union, and we are determined to support the transport connections that will enable that to be possible. Improving our transport and trade links to the European mainland is even more important given the challenges that we face at these times. The Cabinet Secretary met with Mr Ruskell on Tuesday evening to discuss this issue, and I know she is happy to continue to communicate regularly with potential operators and Scotland's main ports so that Scottish exporters and passengers have more direct routes to and from Europe.
Mark Ruskell.
Well, can I thank the First Minister for that response? I absolutely welcome the engagement with the Cabinet Secretary earlier in the week. It's absolutely clear that a direct ferry service between Rosyth and Dunkirk would be a great win for the economy and the environment. It would be wonderful news for all of us who cherish our connections with the rest of Europe. I understand the ferry operators DFDS want to move forward to start sailing in spring next year. Fourth ports who own Rosyth want progress, the Port of Dunkirk are bought in, and the Westminster Government are also supportive. The only thing that is getting in the way, First Minister, is Brexit bureaucracy around the location of a border control post. Time is ticking. A resolution needs to be found by the end of June to secure this service, First Minister. Are you able to take the lead to convene stakeholders and to resolve these remaining issues and get this over the line?
Always through the Chair. First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I welcome the assessment given by Mr Ruskell, and I know the Transport Secretary is very much engaged on this question and familiar with the issue about border controls that is causing some difficulty. This issue has been discussed by the Transport Secretary with Mr Ruskell, as I said, also with Annabel Ewing, who's been pursuing this issue. And we've had good constructive discussions with DFDS, Fourth Ports and various other interested parties. I'm very happy to be involved, although I'm super confident that the Transport Secretary will be able to do all on this that I could possibly contribute. So I'm sure the Transport Secretary will let me know if she needs any support. But please let me assure Mr Ruskell that the Government would welcome this, and we will do everything we can to remove any obstacles that are in the way.
Thank you. We move to constituency and general supplementaries. Concise questions and responses will enable more members to be involved, and I call Michelle Thompson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Chief Executive of Scottish Engineering has warned that Labour's immigration proposals risk undermining recruitment of vital workers, saying immigration is a vital source of skills and experience that cannot be replaced overnight. My concern is not only for Scotland, but also for my constituency, including Grangemouth, where STEM skills form part and parcel of any future economic recovery. Will this SNP Scottish Government continue to make the case for a separate immigration system, not only because it's the right thing, but because it's an economic imperative?
First Minister.
Yes, the Government will do that. I'm not sure if I've shared this detail with Parliament before. I think I may have. But in the aftermath of the publication of the Green Paper on immigration by the United Kingdom Government, I convened a meeting of stakeholders across the education, health, social care, food and drink, hospitality, construction and engineering sectors. And the view that was expressed to me around that table was that these proposals from the UK Government were directly damaging to the prospects for the Scottish economy, given the fact that we face challenges in boosting our working age population, which is boosted by migration. So we are working with stakeholders, and I raised this issue with the Prime Minister when we met a week past Friday to indicate that we need to have a different and distinctive approach to migration in Scotland, and obviously the Government will pursue that, but we'll do that in consultation and dialogue with stakeholders, one of which is Scottish Engineering, and I welcome the contribution that Michelle Thompson has placed on the record from the organisation.
Pam Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Today I spoke to the Largs Medical Group, the only GP practice serving the people of Largs. They raised their concerns about the plans for a new 80-bed care home that mainly would focus on patients with dementia. The GP practice worries that they will bear the brunt of the additional pressure created by such a facility. Can I therefore ask the First Minister if he is aware of these plans, and if the First Minister would agree this risks impacting local residents who are already worried about the difficulties of getting GP appointments?
First Minister.
President Officer, I'm not familiar with the case that Pam Gossel puts to me, although I understand that Mr Gibson, as a local member, has met with the group and has discussed this particular issue. Obviously, this is a local matter. There will be a variety of discussions that will have to be undertaken with the local authority and with the Health Board, and those issues will be considered at local level. But it is important that we have a network of facilities, of social care facilities, residential care facilities around the country that meet the needs of the population. It must be a fundamental hallmark of our society. Of course, one of the challenges that we face in social care and in residential care is finding enough care workers, which is not helped by the UK Government's approach on immigration.
Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week I attended a meeting with constituents from Barra with Calmac and Seamal. It became clear during the meeting that it had long been recognised that Barra's Ferry, the MV Isle of Lewis will be retired next year. But despite this, a practical alternative ferry has not been planned for the route. CMAL suggested a ferry with a lot less capacity, citing the population size of the Isle of Barra, apparently ignorant of the fact that the islanders cannot get bookings on their existing ferry due to lack of capacity. Barra is, in fact, the southern gateway to the Western Isles. Decisions made on assumptions held by distant bureaucrats rather than the available data indicates why our ferry provision is in such a mess. So can I ask the First Minister if he will intervene personally and ensure that when the MV Isle of Lewis is retired, the people of Barra have a ferry that meets their needs?
Let's keep our questions and responses concise. First Minister.
As Rhoda Grant probably knows, I'm very familiar with issues in relation to the ferry fleet, and CalMac have to take a variety of operational judgments. One of the obligations of the contract, which has been put in place, is that that must be undertaken in dialogue with the Ferry Committee and the Users Committee, and also with individual island communities, which I know is something the Transport Secretary insists upon at all times. So, again, as Rhoda Grant will know, there is more capacity coming into the fleet shortly, and these operational issues will be considered. But I hear her point in relation to the Isle of Lewis, and I'll ask for some briefing on the current situation to make sure that the needs of the community in Barra are properly taken into account.
Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. New analysis from Loughborough University has highlighted a strong correlation between Westminster's cruel two-child cap and child poverty. It also found that SNP policies like the Scottish Child Payment have contributed to overall lower levels of poverty across Scotland as compared to the rest of the UK. Can the First Minister advise what assessment the Scottish Government has made of this report, and can he say more about what action the Scottish Government is taking to eradicate child poverty in Scotland, despite the barriers that Westminster puts in the way?
First Minister.
The difference in the approach that's taken between Scottish Government policies and United Kingdom Government policies, which of course is resulting in us having a situation where child poverty rates are lower in Scotland than in the rest of the UK. There are obviously interesting observations and powerful observations in the report. The Scottish Government, of course, is taking forward work to remove the two-child limit, a step that should have been taken by the Labour Government, but people in Scotland can be assured that the Scottish Government is getting on with what a Labour Government isn't doing properly for Scotland, and will be lifting children out of poverty as a consequence.
Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In light of the recent Ocean Witness report from Open Seas, how can the Scottish Government accelerate the delivery of the required management measures in order to protect the marine environment and safeguard sustainable fisheries for the future?
First Minister.
Obviously, there's an interplay of a number of different factors that have to be considered in relation to fisheries management and the sustainability of our oceans. The Government's policy framework aims to do that, to reconcile some of those tensions and those challenges, and we will take that forward by engagement with different communities and different stakeholders, and by ensuring that we fulfil our statutory obligations.
Richard Leonard.
And can I remind members of my voluntary register of interest? Scottish water workers are on strike this week. On Tuesday night, Scottish Water's Chief Executive turned up at pay talks with the trade unions for less than 2 minutes. If Scottish Water's CEO can scoop up almost £500,000 a year, why can't he lead pay negotiations? So will the First Minister instruct his acting Cabinet Secretary and direct the bosses of Scottish Water, whose inflation-busting salaries, bonuses, pensions and benefits he, as a minister, for more than a decade, personally supported and signed off, will he direct them to do the job that they are lavishly rewarded for, enter meaningful negotiations this afternoon, make an acceptable offer and get this industrial dispute resolved once and for all?
First Minister.
President, I received a letter yesterday from the General Secretary of the STUC on some of these questions about the Scottish Water pay talks. So I asked last night for an update from the Chief Executive of Scottish Water on the approach being taken to the negotiations. So I've asked for that already. I received that just before 8 o'clock this morning, and I've considered it. And in the note that I've had from the Chief Executive of Scottish Water, he indicates to me that he attended the talks to demonstrate leadership support for the engagement. But if Mr Leonard would allow me to finish my sentence. But he did not participate in the negotiations because he wanted to leave the negotiations to the established negotiating machinery involving the trade unions and the leadership of Scottish Water. Now, that's the account that's been given to me. There are talks that start at 1 o'clock this afternoon, and the Government is doing what Mr Leonard will not be surprised to hear we are doing. We're encouraging a resolution of these issues to make sure the matters are resolved amicably.
Karen Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week, Labour Chancellor Rachel Reeves indicated that while some more UK pensioners could receive winter fuel payments this winter as a result of the UK Government's U-turn, not all will. Whilst Labour is determined to take away winter fuel payments from pensioners, can the First Minister provide an update on this Scottish SNP Government's work to reinstate a universal winter fuel payment to all pensioners in Scotland?
First Minister.
President Officer, this is another example where I think people are left dismayed that one of the first actions of an incoming Labour government after 14 miserable Conservative years was to take away universal winter fuel payments from pensioners. I think it frankly beggars belief from members of the public at this being the priority of the Labour government. What the Scottish Government has done is we've made provision in the budget and we are taking forward action, which means that every pensioner household in Scotland will receive a guaranteed minimum of £100 this winter, supporting 815,000 pensioner households, and increases the total forecasted investment in our winter heating benefits to £138 million. So what people in Scotland can be assured, pensioners in Scotland can be assured, is when the Labour government lets you down, the SNP will come to your rescue.
Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, my constituent Sarah Beaton from Elgin has asked me to share her experience of the health service in the hope that it improves things for others. Last June, Sarah was bleeding heavily during her periods and went to see her GP. Following multiple visits, she was recommended for a scan. There was a 9-month waiting list to get a scan. When she received the scan results, there were anomalies and she was suggested for referral to a gynaecologist. She was told on an NHS waiting list she would have to wait another year and a half. Frightened, Sarah and her family felt she couldn't wait that long, and she went private, paying for it herself. That led to discovery of cancerous lesions, which last month were operated on, and Sarah is now recovering at home. I received a response from the Cabinet Secretary this morning to my letter which I sent him about this case, but what does the First Minister say to Sarah, and what will be done to reduce NHS waiting times for gynaecology in Grampian, which is one of the highest in the country?
First Minister.
I'm sorry to hear the experience of Mr Ross's constituent, and I wish Sarah Beaton well in the recovery that she is making. The circumstances that Mr Ross has set out are unacceptable. The health service should be able to address these issues faster, which is why the government is concentrating on the work that we are concentrating on, to reduce long waits, and also to ensure that we are investing to undertake more procedures. And in my answer, I think, to Mr Sawar earlier, I cited the fact that we had been able to exceed the targets for early intervention through procedures than we had expected in the early part of this year. That is underpinning the approach the government is taking to address this situation, and we've allocated over £8.8 million to health boards to particularly target long waits for gynaecology and to avoid the situation that Mr Ross has recounted to me.
And Jackie Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. A new report from Robert Gordon's University has warned that 800 energy jobs could be lost a month unless urgent action is taken. This will be of significant concern to many of my constituents employed in the sector. Despite these dire warnings, the Labour UK government seems determined to press ahead with its misguided energy policies. It is refusing to back vital initiatives such as the Acorn project and is sitting silent as workers lose their jobs. Does the First Minister share my concern that Scotland's energy sector appears to be an afterthought to the Labour UK government? And in the face of this Westminster inaction, can he advise what steps this SNP Scottish Government has taken to deliver a just transition for my constituents in Aberdeen Donside?
First Minister.
So the Government is of course taking a number of steps forward to ensure that we support a just transition to net zero within the Scottish economy. Part of that involves a very focused approach to investment in renewables, which will have significant benefits to the constituents of Jackie Dunbar. But what would also help us in our climate change journey, which is now absolutely critical and pressing, is support from the United Kingdom Government for the Acorn carbon capture and storage project. It is now absolutely critical that that agreement is given in the spending review next week. We have waited far too long. I was promised this project by the last Conservative Government. They failed to deliver. It's now incumbent on the UK Government to take a step that will give us a strategic foundation to our approach on tackling climate change, and that decision can be made next week by the Chancellor, and I encourage the Chancellor to take that decision to approve the Acorn project. It is now, we've waited far too long for this decision.
That concludes First Minister's questions. It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is decision time, and there are no questions to be put as a result of decision time. Decision time, therefore, is concluded, and we will momentarily move on to members' business in the name of Karen Adam. And there will be a short suspension to allow those leaving the chamber and gallery to do so.
Okay, and the final item of business is a members' business debate on motion 17428 in the name of Karen Adam on Thomas Blake Glover, Fraserborough's international legacy. The debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I'd invite members wishing to participate to press the request to speak buttons. I call on Karen Adam to open the debate around 7 minutes. Ms Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Tomorrow marks exactly 187 years since a boy was born in a coastal town in the northeast of Scotland in Fraserburgh, known fondly as the Broch. On the 6th of June 1838, that boy was born on Commerce Street, the son of the town's harbour master. His name was Thomas Blake Glover. I doubt anyone at that time could have imagined just how far that Fraserburgh boy would go, that one day he'd be honoured by the Emperor of Japan, that he'd transform entire industries and economies, and that his legacy would still live on today, not just in history books, but in the shared culture, education and innovation that continue to link Scotland and Japan. Before I continue, Presiding Officer, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished guests joining us in the gallery today. the Consul General of Japan and Cultural Consul at the Consulate General of Japan in Edinburgh. It is an honour to welcome our guests to Parliament and to nurture the international friendships that mean so much to Scotland. Just last week, I had the pleasure of meeting the Consul General at the Japan Cross-Party Group, where I also met the Japanese Ambassador to the UK, His Excellency. It has been a week of Scottish-Japan connections. Presiding Officer, the scale of Glover's global impact is truly extraordinary. He has supported 5 young Japanese students to travel to Britain to study. These 5, called the Choshu 5, went on to help build modern Japan, from a Prime Minister shaping the Constitution to railway systems, modern engineering and infrastructure, reformed currency and finance, and one in particular made his mark on the education system, including introducing education for the deaf. And that connection brings this story very close to home for me. As many in the Chamber know, my father is deaf, and he is also a deaf historian. And about this time last year, he introduced me to Dr. Maneko Yabe, a deaf Japanese academic and postdoctoral research associate at Heriot-Watt University, whose work focuses on deaf studies and communication technology. And I'm also delighted to welcome Dr. Yabe, who joins us in the gallery today. They had connected at a deaf history event in Edinburgh and began exploring historical links between Scotland and Japan. And it was during those conversations they had discovered that Thomas Blake Glover had supported the very group of scholars who helped introduce deaf education in Japan. My father, knowing the significance of Fraserburgh to me, invited me to meet him and Dr. Yabe there at the Glover Garden on Commerce Street, the very site of Glover's birthplace. The garden has been lovingly created and is maintained by the owner, Michael Many, who welcomed us warmly and shared stories of his own visit to the Glover Garden in Nagasaki, where Glover's former home is now preserved, and it is visited by millions. In Japan, Glover is remembered, respected and celebrated. And after that visit and the conversations we had with Michael Many, I thought, why not here? Why not do something in Fraserburgh? I began speaking with local community leaders, and before long a festival committee was formed as a branch of the Fraserburgh Rotary Club. Made up of passionate volunteers, there are people who have given their time, energy and hearts to create something truly special for the town that they love in an extraordinary short space of time. Although she's far too modest to take credit herself, I want to recognise Councillor Anne Bell, who has played a central role as chair of the committee, along with all of those involved. This Sunday, the 8th of June, we will come together for the first inaugural Thomas Blake Glover Festival. And this isn't just about looking back, it's about bringing people together to celebrate Fraserburgh's connection to the wider world and everything that we have to be proud of. There is so much talent and creativity in Fraserburgh. The afternoon programme features performances from amazing local talent, and it will also be a day of international friendship. We will be joined by several distinguished guests, including the Consul General and Deputy CRO EMEA of the Mitsubishi Corporation, Ronnie Watt OBE, recipient of the Order of the Rising Sun, and Lady Saltoun. Presiding Officer, I fear trying to mention every person and group involved in case I leave someone out, but the full programme of the distinguished guests and the lists will be available online for anybody who wants to follow along with the celebrations. On the day, we're going to plant a cherry tree in Glover's memory, right there on the site of his birth. A living symbol of connection and growth, with the roots in the broch, just like Glover, but looking upwards to the rising sun and blossoming each year leading up to his birthday to remind us of our Japan connections. That connection continues in ways that feel almost poetic. If you stand at Fraserburgh Harbour, the very one where Glover's father once worked as a harbour master, and look out to sea, you'll see wind turbines, forming part of the Ocean Winds Murray East offshore wind project. Turbines with Mitsubishi, Lynx, and the Glover Company helped bring this into being. Fraserburgh is a town where people simply get on with it. They work very hard. It's a place with global reach and a thriving fishing industry. The people there continually recognise and act on their potential. There are plans to expand the harbour, a master plan for future growth, and there's a strong and growing campaign to bring back rail to connect Fraserburgh to Aberdeen. And these are the kinds of forward-looking projects that I believe would have resonated with Glover himself. He introduced Japan's first steam locomotive, he modernised shipbuilding, he supported education reform, he was a connector of people and ideas and a true visionary. And I believe he'd be proud of what's happening in Fraserburgh, not just because we're remembering him, but because we're building something worthy of the legacy that he left behind. It's about making sure that a boy born on Commerce Street 187 years ago isn't just remembered, but that he's celebrated. And through him, we remember what Fraserburgh has contributed to the world and what it still can. So I want to thank everyone who has helped make this happen. The Festival Committee, Fraserburgh Rotary Club, Michael Menny, Councillor Anne Bell, Dr Manco Yabe, and of course my father, who introduced me to the legacy of Thomas Blake Glover, a wee boy from the Broch. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Adam. Can I add my welcome to the Consul-General as well? We move to the open debate, and I call first Tess White to be followed by Jackie Dunbar. Around 4 minutes. Ms White.
Konnichiwa. Konnichiwa. Presiding Officer, I thank Karen Adam for securing the time for today's Members' Business debate. Thomas Glover, as we've heard, was a truly remarkable man with roots that run deep in the northeast of Scotland. A strategist and an industrialist, he is lauded for his role, as we've heard, in establishing the Mitsubishi Corporation, a powerhouse of the Japanese Industrial Revolution. Known as the Scottish Samurai, Glover is venerated in Japan for his key contribution to industrialisation and modernisation, and it's why he was awarded the Order of the Rising Sun, an extraordinary accolade for a man hailing from the Broch. Glover, as we've heard, was born in Fraserburgh in 1838 on Commerce Street and educated in Aberdeen. Stonehaven too has a strong link to the man known as the Scottish Samurai. In 2021, pupils from Mill of Forest, Arduthy and Dunnottar primary schools worked with the Stonehaven Sea Cadets and Stonehaven Horizon Group to plant 120 cherry blossom trees in Mineral Park. The garden was dedicated to the memory of Glover, a living testament to his ingenuity and legacy. Part of the Sakura Cherry Tree project, the garden has joined more than 1,000 parks, gardens and schools across the UK in marking 150 years of Japan-UK friendship and the continued cooperation between our two nations. It was launched by the former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and former Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May in 2021. There are always strong community champions behind brilliant initiatives like this, and it was Aberdeenshire Councillor Wendy Agnew, working with local MP Andrew Bowie, who spearheaded the project and helped to see it through over a 4-year period. It has been enchanting residents and visitors ever since. Wendy would like to thank the Consul-General today and the whole of Japan for what she said is a very generous gift to Stonehaven. And she would like to invite the Japanese Consul-General on behalf of the community to place a plaque in the garden where the blossoms are out in spring next year in Stonehaven. As we underline the importance of Thomas Blake Glover, we can also take the opportunity to think about so many Scots who have left Britain to start inspiring adventures on the other side of the world, and people like the Davidson family from Abelemno near Brechin, who moved to Wisconsin in the USA and became the founders of Harley-Davidson Motor Company with Englishman Bill Harley. And there's David Dunbar Buick, the Arbroath-born plumber, who became an icon in the United States after founding the Buick Motor Company. Along with Thomas Glover, these individuals were the self-starters, the adventurers and visionaries, and their testament to the incredible spirit of the North East. Arigato. Arigato.
Thank you, Ms White. And I call Jackie Dunbar to be followed by Martin Whitfield. Around 4 minutes. Ms Dunbar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I congratulate my friend and colleague Karen Adam for securing today's members' debate on Thomas Blake Glover. There is a very long list of folk from Aberdeen, whether they were born there, grew up there or lived there later in life, that have helped shape the world as we know it today. We have a history of innovation, of world-leading engineering, of global influence. But we are absolutely dreadful at telling folk about it. We seem to not want to talk up our history or the folk who made it happen. And Thomas Blake Glover is probably the best example of this in Aberdeen. He is at least somewhat known and spoken about, although a great part of that is due to the work of the Mitsubishi Corporation and their kind donations that saw his parents' home in Bridge of Dawn in my Aberdeen Donside constituency turned into a museum. We have a man who helped shape Japan's history, from the role he played in their civil war, who helped them rebuild their navy, who introduced rail travel to Japan, and maybe one day we might even reintroduce rail service to his native Broch, as Karen Adam already alluded to, and who played important roles in the foundations of two internationally recognised brands, Mitsubishi and Kirin. He is a man who we should be talking about. The extraordinary life he lived lends itself to storytelling, but far too many folk haven't heard of him. And I'm hoping that today's debate will help more folk to hear and learn about Thomas Blake Glover. And if we can have success with him, then we can maybe move on to some of our city's 5 Nobel Prize winners, or the great minds that come from the King's and Marshall Colleges during the Scottish Enlightenment. But as I said, let's start with Thomas Blake Glover. Karen Adam has already spoken about so much of his life, and it certainly wasn't boring or uncontroversial. He was an immigrant, an immigrant to us. He was an arms dealer. He was a criminal due to the arms dealing, although he seems to have been forgiven as he only sold to the winning side and commissioned warships for Japan in shipyards in Aberdeen. He ran a coal mine. He was a pioneer of public transport. He created jobs and he owned a brewery. So there's something there for everyone to have an opinion on. It's certainly not a life that deserves to be forgotten, and it's disappointing that Glover House, his parents' former home that I mentioned, is now sitting empty. It was bought by Mitsubishi in 1996, restored to what it would have looked like in the 1850s, and was given to the Grampian Japan Trust to run as a museum. It moved to being run by Aberdeen City Council in 2006, before it eventually closed in 2012 due to low visitor numbers and rising costs. I remember being given a tour and hosting Japanese dignitaries there back in the day when I had the privilege of being Deputy Provost of Aberdeen. Money has been spent maintaining and repairing it since, but 12 years later, the Council is still looking for a suitable purpose for this building, and the condition of it is slowly getting worse, as it needs to be lived in to survive, as is the case for all buildings. They decay much quicker when unused. Whatever form it takes, whether it's a museum or something else, we need to ensure Glover has a lasting and fitting legacy in Aberdeen. And as our city looks beyond oil and gas, he's probably an example to look to for someone who could help build new industries. Some of that may be tourism, in which case we have to get better at telling and marketing Thomas Blake Glover's story. Or it may be through entrepreneurship, and it's his spirit that we need to tap into. I've spoken about the past. Now the question is, what will the future be? So can I thank again Karen Adam for giving me a chance to talk about Thomas Blake Glover today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Dunbar. I now call Martin Whitfield to be followed by Kevin Stewart. Around 4 minutes, Mr Whitfield.
I'm very grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I, like others, thank Karen Adam for securing this actually phenomenally important debate on a day where perhaps its importance for members here should not have been overshadowed by events elsewhere. But can I also extend my welcome to the honourable guests that join us today. I had a lovely speech because I wanted to talk about the number of Scottish people, unfortunately mainly men, who emigrated abroad and are recognised for the fortunes that have been made or the developments that they did. And Jackie Dunbar allows me, of course, to mention James Paris Lee of Lee Enfield fame, the creator of the rifle, and the dubious, perhaps questionable, I think so well phrased by Jackie Dunbar to allow us to have an opinion on how these people operated, to Charles Lockhart, of course, who was one of the founders of Standard Oil. But actually, I was much more taken by the opening statement because actually, in the moment on the 6th of June in 1838, when the subject of our debate today was born, of course, 6 weeks old on that day was John Muir, who was born in Dunbar. So while he was no doubt crying, no doubt mewling, no doubt being a challenging child to his mum, another hero came into the world. And we see so many similarities in the two stories. Someone who left as a child, who, where they grew up, actually shaped what they did in their future. In John Muir's case, it was, of course, being born in Dunbar and looking around at the East Lothian landscape as the third of 8 children, not the most important in the household, who ran riot and escaped and fell in love with nature, fell in love with landscape, and then, for other circumstances, travelled abroad, in this case, obviously, to America, where as he grew up, because of those memories, because of those experiences in childhood, and because, in his case, of his love for nature, he became known as John of the Mountains, the father of the national parks, the man who converted presidents to look at nature in a different way, a man who was able to shape the future of another country because of their enthusiasm, their skill, their passionate telling stories, to bring together an importance. And I think when I look at Dunbar High Street, where his birthplace is celebrated as a museum that is attended by school children across East Lothian and further afield, to keep it alive, to keep that history in place. We see perhaps an example that can be followed elsewhere by local authorities, by charities and by supporters from outside of the country, because much money has come from the US in respect of John Muir, to allow that story to live, so that perhaps a P5 can wander into what looks like an old-fashioned house, wander around, step out, and suddenly think, actually, no one can stop my future being what I want it to be, wherever it is and however it is made. And so, for that purpose, I think this debate today about Thomas Blake Glover, this debate that has allowed members across this chamber to look for their own heroes, and I hope some can find heroines across their regions, about why Scotland looking outwards is always so much more important than perhaps Scotland looking inwards, and to celebrate our friends across the world who come back here to find the history of people who are important in their history, and that we meet them, we greet them, we celebrate it, and we use those experiences to teach our young people there is genuinely nothing you cannot achieve if you're born in Scotland and you look up. I'm grateful, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whitfield. Now call Kevin Stewart to be followed by Douglas Lumsden. Around 4 minutes, Mr Stewart.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And I too would wish to congratulate Karen Adam in bringing this debate to the Chamber today. Thomas Blake Glover is often hailed as the Scottish samurai and was a quite remarkable figure who played an immense role in the modernisation of Japan during the 19th century. And as Ms Adam has already pointed out, Thomas Blake Glover was born in Fraserburgh, but his family moved to Aberdeen in 1851 when his father became the chief coastguard in the area. And Thomas received part of his education at the Channery House School in Old Aberdeen. After leaving school, he embarked in a career with the Jardine Matheson Company, which at that point was a major trading company, and that took him to Shanghai in 1857. And 2 years later, Glover made the move to Nagasaki in Japan, a nation that was then in a period of isolation, but was about to see some dramatic change. Initially, Thomas Blake Glover's presence was for Jardine Matheson, trading primarily in Japanese green tea. However, his drive soon led him to found his own firm, and we have heard of some of the immense contributions that he has made from other speakers. In terms of shipbuilding, he was the man who helped establish Japan's first modern slip dock in Nagasaki, a facility that was crucial for ship repair. He later sold his share in that to the Japanese government, which subsequently leased it to Mitsubishi, marking a foundational step for the corporation. And he also helped commission several warships for the Imperial Japanese Navy from shipyards in Aberdeen, including the Josho Maru, which later became the Ryoju Maru, which was launched in 1869. As Jackie Dunbar has mentioned, he was involved in mining, opening a coal mine at Hishima Island and introducing modern mining techniques. He was responsible for introducing the first steam locomotive, the Iron Duke, to Japan in 1865, which led to folks seeing the potential of railway transportation, something that Japan has truly grasped with its railway network today. And he also, as has already been mentioned, established a brewery, the Kirin Brewery. And it is said, also I believe it's an urban myth, that the creature's moustache on Kirin Beer's labels is a tribute to Glover's own prominent facial hair. True or not, I don't know. An immense contribution for Japan and its links with the northeast of Scotland also led to much trade between the northeast and Japan, including the export from Aberdeen of the world-renowned Crombie cloth. And that trading network has to be celebrated, in my humble opinion. I do think that we need to do more to celebrate Thomas Blake Glover, and like Jackie Dunbar, I hope that more can be done to renovate Thomas Blake Glover House in Aberdeen, and to make that a place where folks from the northeast, from Japan and elsewhere can visit and learn about the fabulous Thomas Blake Glover.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. And now come to the final speaker in the open debate, Douglas Lumsden, in around 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and can I congratulate Karen Adam on securing the debate, and also thank her for educating us more about Thomas Blake Glover. Because today's debate gives us an opportunity to celebrate someone from the North East who was probably more famous outside the North East than in it, and that's a point that Jackie Dunbar had made. It also gives us an opportunity to celebrate Scotland's strong links with Japan, links that I witnessed firsthand when I was leader of Aberdeen City Council. Aberdeen signed a memo of understanding with Kobe in Japan in 2019, strengthening links between the cities. And I'm wearing my Kobe tartan tie today, a gift I received when a delegation came to visit Aberdeen to sign the agreement. I also did find out it's not just tartan that we have in common, but the love of whisky was something that I learned about at that time also. And it was when I was a councillor that I became aware of Thomas Blake Glover and the impact he had and how important a role he played in the industrialisation of Japan, and how the council owned Glover House in Bridge of Dawn that we've heard about, a home that had been used by the Glover family. And I remember the conversations with Richard Sweetnam, a council officer, who was sadly taken from us too young, about how big a deal Glover was and how, as a city, we should be making more of a deal of him, and if there was an opportunity for tourism, celebrating the person. And that was something that was shared by all parties within Aberdeen City Council. We didn't often agree, but we did agree on Glover. Then the then Lord Provost, Barney Crockett, was also heavily involved with Mitsubishi to see if there was a partnership we could have to utilise the Glover House in Bridgerton. And I seem to remember Martin Gilbert and Aberdeen Asset were also involved in that process. And it is regret that, as my time as a councillor, we couldn't come up with a sustainable plan on what could we do with Glover House. We were working with Aberdeen University and Mitsubishi, and the plan was that part of Glover House would be a museum celebrating Glover, and part of the house would be used for Japanese students attending Aberdeen University to live in while they were in the city studying. But regrettably, that plan fell through when COVID struck, and I don't believe any plan has come forward since then. And that's a real shame. I've visited Glover House myself, along with a delegation from Kobe in 2019, and it'd be sad to see that house fall into further disrepair. It is part of the history of the North East and should be protected, and hopefully a sustainable future can be found for the house. And my lasting memory from the visit was the friendliness of our Japanese guests, the warmth, the kindness, the interest in Glover was something that will stay with me, and it made me determined to visit Japan in the near future. And when I am there, hopefully I will visit the Thomas Blake Glover statue in Nagasaki to pay my respect to the man from the North East that made such a huge impact in Japan. So I thank Cara Adam once again for bringing this debate to Parliament, and I wish the organisers of the Thomas Blake Glover Festival every success for the upcoming event. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Lumsden. I now invite Fiona Hislop to respond to the debate. Cabinet Secretary, around 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'd like to thank all members who have taken part in this afternoon's debate, and Karen Adam for bringing forward this motion. And I also extend my welcome to our honourable visitors. Scotland's relationship with Japan is one that has endured for centuries and continues to grow from strength to strength. Indeed, I've had the pleasure, when I held the position of Cabinet Secretary for External Affairs, to promote Scotland's economy and other interests on 3 visits to Japan over my 11 years in that portfolio. And it is a relationship that is marked by a deep mutual respect and admiration for one another's traditions and cultures, as well as eagerness to promote further collaboration wherever possible. Just last week, the First Minister hosted Japan's ambassador to the UK at Bute House to recognise the close relationship Scotland and Japan share. And our shared history is marked by numerous pioneers who continue to have a significant impact on our relations to this current day. Thomas Blake Glover is rightly seen as someone who has great significance in the development of modern Japan, and his name is synonymous with the early links between Japan and Scotland. And he played a pivotal role in the establishment of Mitsubishi Corporation, helping develop its shipbuilding operations. And Mitsubishi has gone on to become one of Japan's largest trading companies, employing over 60,000 people. And his legacy lives on today in both nations. And I congratulate Karen Adams' father for helping us rediscover that deaf education connection between Scotland and Japan. The Glover House and Garden that sits in Nagasaki allows visitors to learn about Glover's life and influence on Japan, including the technologies he helped advance, with up to 2 million people visiting annually. And this ensures that his history is not forgotten there. Presiding Officer, in 2015, I was lucky enough to visit this marvellous garden on a visit to Japan, where I also visited the wider Nagasaki industrial area and Mitsubishi Shipbuilding, which is still there. I was given the honour of a tour of the Thomas Blake Glover House by trustees. And interestingly, on the wall, I saw a calligraphy that had been framed, and I asked what the translation was. And it said, "The ocean is a field." Now, that was obviously something that meant something to Thomas Blake Glover at the time in terms of trading and in terms of shipbuilding. But of course, if you look at Fraserburgh, the connections of the ocean as a field in terms of fishing, or indeed its future opportunities with the sea, I think also is an interesting connection. During my visit, I presented Japanese stakeholders with 3D digital models of the Nagasaki industrial site, scanned as part of the Scottish 10 project, a joint collaboration between Historic Environment Scotland and the Glasgow School of Art. And this scanned data helped conserve a site which is of major significance to Thomas Blake Glover and other prominent Scots present in Japan in the 19th century, and was influential in securing its UNESCO World Heritage Site status for Japan. So, of course, in Fraserburgh, as we've now heard, we now have the Glover Garden, which acts as a memorial to mark his birthplace and is a demonstration of the connection and friendship between Scotland and Japan. And as we've heard, as part of this memorial, the inaugural Thomas Blake Glover Festival is to take place on the 8th of June, marking his contribution to both nations. And, of course, Thomas Glover's legacy even transcends his industrial ventures. A series of Japanese-Scotch whisky fusions have been created and named after him to honour his achievements, and it's very fitting to see him memorialised through Scotland's national drink. Thomas Blake Glover was a true pioneer, and it's only right that he's remembered in Scotland as he is in Japan. And reflecting on the remarks of Jackie DeBar and also of Miss Lumsden, I think there's an issue about what happens with the Thomas Blake Glover House in Aberdeen, and I reflect the opportunity that may have existed pre-COVID for Japanese students to be based there. And of course the Nippon Foundation are encouraging students and supporting students to study in Scotland, and perhaps there may be avenues there that can be explored. Presiding Officer, I firmly believe that as a friendly, open and outward-looking nation, Scotland should always encourage and explore connections with other nations, as Martin Whitfield pointed out in his thoughtful speech. Thomas Blake Glover's life and legacy is a prime example of the impact Scottish individuals and businesses can have abroad. And the best tribute, as Karen Adams states, is using it to build for the future. Scotland's Scottish Connections Framework, launched in 2023, sets out our ambitions to expand our relationships with and between Scotland's international communities. And we're rightly proud of our long history of intellectual, cultural and economic exchange. Scotland's diaspora and our Scottish connections are an extension of Scotland itself. The Scottish Government welcomes the development of the Glover Garden in Fraserburgh, an initiative which honours someone who made a significant contribution to the development of Japan. And this will serve as a reminder of that long-standing connection between Scotland and Japan, and as a symbol of our lasting friendship. So on behalf of the Scottish Government, I wish the organisers well in both developing but now in delivering the first Thomas Blake Glover Festival, and I hope the day is a great success. And I thank the local constituency MSP Karen Adam for bringing this motion in debate to our national parliament.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting of Parliament.